So we are rolling into it's actually the last episode for the season of the podcast. I'm going to take a little break this summer and wander as far as I can. But today we have Pastor Moe Diggs, and so I'm looking forward to chatting with him. Thanks for taking the time to do this, Mo.
Well, thanks for having me, Mike. And I'm kind of honored that it's like, man, you're the last one for the season. Wow.
I know, right? You always save the best for last, right?
All right now.
Yeah, I hope none of the other guests hear that, but
Yeah. We'll see how that goes, right? When everybody else determines that. So, yeah.
So why don't we just start out with, some of the people who are watching will know who you are, and some won't. So why don't we just start out with where you're at right now, where you're at kind of in ministry, and what your main focus is, what you do.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm Moe Diggs, and I live in Waldorf, Maryland, just outside of DC. Melissa, my bride, and our three daughters, Sarah, Rebecca, and Lydia, moved here like 9 years ago to plant a church, a part of New Life Network under Mike Hilson. We were in Virginia for 15 years with John Ott. And then God just directed us here through a mutual connection of Pastor John and Pastor Mike to come here and plant a church. And so we started the church 9 years ago. So I lead the church with the staff. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the name of your church. You're kind of wearing your heart right on your sleeve there. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the name of our church is Healing Place Church, and that just came. There's a really cool story. We had a couple of other names that we were going to name the church, and just through council, they're like, "No, let's not do that," and just different reasons. So we just kept praying, and then one morning, I was actually at early morning prayer at New Life on the campus there, and as we were praying for the service, God just dropped in my heart, Healing Place, and I was like, "Oh my." That's it. So I came home and listened over lunch. I shared the name with her, and she's like, "That's the name. That's our story." And it would be like God to have us name the church Healing Place. And so it's based out of Isaiah 60, where the Spirit of the Lord's upon us. I know it was prophesying about Jesus, but we represent Jesus to the world, as a church. The Spirit of the Lord's on us to bring good news and to set the captive free and bind up broken hearts. And so that has been our heartbeat. That's been our story, just both Melissa's story, my story, and our story together. And it's just really cool that God's now giving us the opportunity to raise up other people to bring healing and hope to one person at a time.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's with a name like that, there's no doubt about what the church is about, and so and I love that. And then typically that's not in the tribe that we travel in. Healing isn't something that I would say is overemphasized, and so it's nice to kind of see that right there, right there in the DNA of the church.
And bringing healing to the whole person,
right? Yeah, including emotional and all kinds of other healing.
Everything from we call it from the inside out. Letting it up and out so you can get healed.
Right, and I think that's ultimately, if you look at the ministry of Jesus, I mean, if we could choose words like transformation. There's several words we could choose, but a healing would definitely be up there in terms of what did Jesus do during his earthly ministry? It's like he went around healing people, whether it was physical or spiritual or whatever they needed. He offered healing to them, and I think he's still doing that today.
100%. And we get to be a part of that, And we put so much pressure on ourselves, but he's not asking us to put the pressure on ourselves. The pressure is on him and his kingdom, and we get to just advance his kingdom. We get to be an extension of his kingdom. We get to be his hands and feet, and he's just wanting us to partner with him. It's not we're working for Jesus, we're working with him, and that's what it is. And it's just being available and stepping out of the boat and say, God, I'm going to be a tool you're going to use to just bring healing and hope to the person that's in front of me right now. Because so many times we look at the masses, and that's great, but he's wanting us to do it one person at a time, and that one person will become masses, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think most of our, I think our ministries grow out of whatever God has kind of done in our life and the history that we've kind of established with him. And so why don't we just go back? Why don't you share your story a little bit, Mo? Just tell us a little bit about your background and your spiritual history.
Yeah. Okay. So I grew up in a dysfunctional home, broken home, and actually a single parent home for a bulk of my life. And so I gave my life to Jesus at 16. We grew up going to church, and my mom gave her life to Jesus like 2 months after I was born. She wasn't discipled and nurtured. It was later on in life, actually, while I was at Bible college, my mom turned her life around 100%. So I grew up aware of Jesus, knowing about Jesus, but my grandparents were very instrumental in my life and really taking me on the weekends and taking me to church with them on a regular basis. They went to a really great dynamic, spirit-filled congregation that just oozed love and the presence of God in a tangible way for a 9-year-old and 10-year-old that I had an up-close view of. And that sort of marked me, but I did not get saved till I was 16. And I remember when I gave my life to Jesus, I knew there was more, and I just went after the more. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that just getting saved.
Sometimes it's better not to know all the details, right?
Yeah. I went after him, and from day one, there was a hunger in my heart for his word, for his presence. And I don't know, I just went after him. And I remember seeing it lived out in my grandparents, the community they were part of. And so I went after it. And then in that going after him, he began to call me into ministry, and I fought it. I didn't want it. But going after him, he was bringing healing to my life. Little did I know. I was going after him. I felt safe. I felt a place that I could deal with my issues, because I had so many issues, so many. And going to him was just a safe place. And so my bedroom became my I call it my BBC, before BBC, my Bible college place, but just where I pursued God's presence and went after him. And in that, he began to address those issues in my life that need to be addressed. But then he began to awaken my heart to a call that I fought for a long time. But then I got to a place where I realized I need to really submit my heart to his will. And I had a plan, and I was pursuing that plan, but he said, I need you to do what I want you to do. And I realized if he was inviting me to do what he wanted to do, his plan probably was much better than mine.
Yeah. What was your plan? Like, what were you thinking?
I was going to be a social worker, and I was
Okay.
actually accepted already at St. Mary's University. So I was going to do 2 years at St. Mary's, because I'm from Halifax, and then I was going to transfer to Dalhousie School of Social Working.
Okay.
That was my plan.
Yeah, that was your plan. And, and in a way,
it was a good plan.
And there's nothing, I have a daughter who's a social worker. And so there's nothing wrong with being a social worker, but it is all about God's plan, whatever God's plan is for us. And so, and I find like nothing is wasted. Like the impulse that made you want to be a social worker, there's a very similar impulse in ministry. I think, and just your description of ministering to the whole person, allows you to exercise some of that gifting that God had built right in there.
Big time. And I tell the church that, I tell them, actually a few months ago, I was sharing how my plan was to be a social worker, and God, interrupts our plan, right? And he gave me the choice. So I still had a choice, but I knew if I wanted to really be in the center of his will, it would probably best for me to yield to his will. But I said, it's cool that I'm also still getting to do some of those things, ministering to families, counseling, and just serving the body of Christ. So he's put it in my heart for people. And so he just chose the avenue of vocational ministry, planning a church, pastoring a church, to do it, when no matter what God's asking you to do, you have a sphere of influence. And it's us being intentional to be the presence of God wherever that is. Like you say, your daughter's a social worker, or if it's a school teacher, or if it's a nurse, whatever it is, you have a sphere of influence. And all God is asking you to do is lean into that, be available, and he'll do the rest.
Right. And so that's the call, kind of proceeded. You're coming to what is now Kingswood, and where I'm kind of filming from right now, and was Bethany Bible College at the time. So, So what was it like, kind of coming out of Nova Scotia and coming to a rural New Brunswick as a Bible college student? What was that like for you?
For me, nerve-wracking, because by nature, I'm an introvert. I'm not an extrovert, so I'm very inward. I was not outside of my home per se for long periods of time. I did work at a summer camp in New Glasgow for 2 years. And actually, that's where I met Juanita Lewis at the time. And she's the one that introduced me to Bethany.
Right.
And so coming from Nova Scotia was a big stretch for me. I mean, I remember the day I met Peter Moore at the student center. I could barely talk. I could barely say my name. I was a nervous wreck, right? And but the community was very gracious, took me in. People were very gracious to come to me the first day and help me feel welcomed and settle into the school, into the life of school. Yeah.
That's all. Yeah, I remember you and Juanita well because you were, let's just say you were a little more charismatically oriented at the time than the school was. And so I remember the first time I heard a tambourine in chapel and I was like, oh, this is going to be fun. We're going to have some fun here. So
Yeah, yeah, those are great memories, man. Yeah.
one of the one of the one of the things that I remember about your time here was something God was kind of doing in your heart, concerning your dad. And it's a powerful story. I've never forgotten it. I wonder if you just kind of share that a little bit, because I think it relates to the whole healing thing that we've been talking about.
Yeah. So I grew up very bitter toward my dad, a lot of unforgiveness that I just held on to for many reasons. I chose not to let it go. And then when I gave my life to Jesus, that's one of the things God began to deal with my heart on. So I was in high school and God really began to speak to me about the need to forgive my father. He began to show me in my own life that it was hindering me. It was hindering my relationships with people. It was really going to hinder where he wanted to take me, what he wanted to do. I did not know the significance of that, but I just knew there was an invitation from the Lord. So I started taking the journey of choosing to forgive my dad. And so when I was at chapel my first year, it was Spiritual Infants Week, and the speaker was speaking, and he was actually talking about when Paul was asking Timothy to come to him before winter. And the invitation was like, stop putting off what you should be doing today for tomorrow, like do it. So I thought I was going to the altar to pray because I was like, I really be more intentional with witnessing to my sister. So this is what I need to stop putting off. So I'm at the altar, and it was almost like the Lord was like playing a trick on me.
Right.
Like,
He's throwing a curveball.
Yeah. Now let's talk about why you're really here. And man, when he pointed out, and this is what I felt him say to me, that I need you now to go ask your father for forgiveness. And I remember, like, in my heart saying, I know I cannot do this. And he said, I need you to. And the wrestling match at that altar. And then when I finally yielded and I just broke and wept and I just let it all out and go. And I at the end of chapel, Danny and Marilyn Gordon were there, and they came and they were embracing me and checking up on me, doctors, make sure I was okay. And I told them what I felt the Lord was telling me to do. And I said, I can't put it off for tomorrow. I need to do it today. And they offered me their home to go. They offered me their phone. They said, call direct. Don't even worry about call and collect. Use our phone. And I went and I called my dad. And I basically said to my dad, I've held all this stuff in my heart against you. And, it wasn't about who was right, who was wrong. I made decisions as a child, and based off what I seen and grew, but I need you to forgive me. And will you forgive me? And my dad said, well, okay, when you gave your life to Jesus, weren't you supposed to do that then? And I said, Dad, if I would have come to you when I first got to know Jesus, it wouldn't have been good. But I'm coming to you now. Will you forgive me? And he said, I forgive you. And it was like the weight of the world lifted off my shoulders. And that was the beginning of our relationship being restored. And so I went back, and then I think I told, of course, Doc and Marilyn were there, and I told them. And then later on, I think Perez asked me to share with the student body, I think that night or later on that week, I don't remember. But that was a huge moment. And then there was this building of a restoring of a relationship. And then I'll fast forward 4 years later, my dad came to my graduation, which was huge. I mean,
yeah, if I remember right, he was like right in the front row, like he was just front and center there.
Yeah. So he was actually sitting in the back, and then when I came off the stage, he came from the back up front.
Okay.
Hugged me in front of the whole student body, and
right.
So then for the students to know the story, that I felt like I was thinking about this morning. Actually, it was a significant moment for the whole body, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I was just reminded of how God does heal us in community. Like he transforms our life in community, and it was just really cool that he came, he was like weeping, like I'm consoling my dad on my graduation service.
Yeah. And that, and it became, obviously it was about you and your dad, but it was for everybody else. It was something more than that. It was it was a picture of restoration,
Yes.
which is
Great.
basically what, that's what Bible college is all about, right? We have the ministry of reconciliation. So
Big time, brother.
to just see it visibly like that, I think it was. I've been to a lot of graduations in my life, so, but I think that was one of my favorite graduation ceremonies, for sure, just because that was powerful. So I don't. Another thing that I this just popped into my head, and I don't know if I've ever told you about this, but I think it'll bless you if I haven't. It's really interesting. I don't know. There used to be like a really old dungeony reform school around here, where it was basically like the teen jail for the area, and we went there to do service one time. There was a group of students and myself, and you were there, and it was it was kind of, the atmosphere was really hard to work in, and there was like a whole lot of people, but there was this one kid. I think we gave like an altar call at the end of it, and there was a barrier between us and the inmates, but there was this one kid who raised his hand, and you and I went over to kind of pray with him, and he accepted Jesus. But then all the guards got really antsy, and they started pulling people out to go back to their cells, and so this kid kind of got pulled away from us. And I don't know if you remember this, but you had like a big nice Bible with your name like engraved in it, and you, as he was leaving, you reached over and you handed him your Bible, and I remember we were kind of like, oh man, I wish we had more time and wish we could have talked to him more and stuff. But anyway, fast forward like a decade later, it's like 10 years later, I'm speaking somewhere, and after the service, this guy comes up to me. He introduces himself. His name is Gordy, and he tells me this wild story of how after we had prayed with him and he got the Bible, that he went back to his cell, and he laid on his bed, and he was just like, God, I don't even know what I'm doing, but like, I want to have a relationship with you. And he said, like, the Holy Spirit just came over him, and he felt peace, and just had like a real encounter with Jesus. And then he got out, started going to church, and so 10 years later, he's talking to me, and he's carrying the Bible you gave him.
No way.
Yeah, like he goes, and here's the Bible, like, and he opens it up, and your name is there, and I'm like, whoa, like, so so sometimes we have these, we don't even realize we're having these moments and the impact that we're having, but we may never know, but sometimes the Lord reveals it to us like a decade later. And as far as I know, Gordy is still like going to church. He's a Christian, turned his life around. And,
yeah, it's interesting you said that. I did not realize he was still carrying the Bible around, but he actually emailed me a few months ago.
Did he really? Wow.
Several months ago, he emailed me, and it blew me out of the water when I got the email.
Yeah.
Just blew me out of the water. And yeah, it was one of those things that you just, God reminds you that your life does make a difference, even when you don't think it is, or
right.
It's so important that you just obey the Lord, even those small promptings, because you don't know on the other side of your obedience what that might mean, not just for you, but the other person that you're being obedient to minister to.
Right.
Yeah. And we I don't think we listen enough to those promptings, right?
Right.
We don't listen enough. And if we listen, man, what could God do?
Right.
Powerful. Thanks for sharing that.
So your church is, what is the kind of racial makeup or the ethnic makeup of your church? Like, you're kind of, I've only been to your church at one time, and it's been a few years, but if I remember it right, it's kind of a representation of the kingdom. We're blending people together.
Yeah. It's definitely has been that. So the area we're in is like 54% African American, and then like 47% Caucasian, and the rest different nationalities. So our congregation has been a diverse congregation, a multi-ethnic congregation. I would say where we're at right now, it's definitely represents a community of more heavy African American.
Right.
We do have a diversity in our congregation, which has been very beautiful to see.
Yeah. So what are some of the challenges of leading people, leading a church like that, where it's not it's not just kind of segregated into a nice little slice of whatever, but that you've got all different people mixing together to worship God.
Yeah, so I've often said that you want to see what heaven looks like. I've said this on Sunday mornings. Just look around.
Right.
I would say in the season we're in right now, in the midst of all that's been going on in our world, politically and racially, it's been a challenging time, as well as an exciting and adventurous time leading a multi-ethnic church. And what I find that has hindered sometimes is we were separated so long when a lot of the stuff was coming up in our world, the political issue, the racial issue, the divide, that we weren't able to have face-to-face conversations. We weren't able to sit around meals like we're accustomed to have these conversations, to hear each other, to speak to each other. And so what happens when you don't have that, you're left with your assumption or presumption, which is not very good. And so we had to be very intentional to remind our body who we are, whose we are, and how we respond in moments like this. And I think if there's anything in this pandemic, I wish we could have had more time, that we could have had more face-to-face conversations to talk more about those difficult subjects and topics, and it not just be one-sided, but really create more space and opportunity to come around the table to talk, because there is so many issues, but I feel like for us as a community of believers, there's so much beauty even in our differences.
Right. Yeah. And it sounds really simplistic, I know, but I found that relationship is the key to almost any issue. Like the key to solving any issue, if you can just get face to face and set aside like some of those presumptions. And I've been to probably close to like 40 different countries now. I've been interrupted by COVID, but I'm still, I love culture. I love people. I love to see how God works in different communities and different cultures. What has always struck me more than anything is how similar people are, not how different they are. Absolutely. It's like how much we have in common.
Yes. Yeah.
And if we focus on that instead of always highlighting the differences, I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, because I find that not only the enemy, we've allowed other sources to divide us instead of unite us. I think we've allowed other sources to emphasize where we're different more than where we're alike. And you're so right. Relationship is everything, and for me, relationship is the breeding ground for so much in our life. And for me, like, I heard James Dobson say this years ago, rules without relationship breed rebellion. But just think of what happens, how much freedom, real authentic freedom from Christ happens when we're in a true relationship with each other. Because if I'm in a relationship with you and I don't fully understand you, I'm going to be intentional to build and cultivate relationship until I understand you. And when I was thinking about this, actually preparing for even today, like when we're in relationship, I know you. So even if you say something that's off or, okay, that's miss.
Yeah, you know my heart, so you know the intention behind it, right?
Right. Yeah. And so it's easier to fight together because if not, you end up fighting with each other instead of fighting together. And for me, one of the things I think it's so important that we have to figure out what we're fighting for. And what we're fighting for is for heart connection, right? Because transformation happens through heart connection with God and with each other. And so many times we're just fighting, and at the end of the day, we don't even know what we're fighting for. But we just got a bunch of noise and a bunch of mess. And even the relationships that we had once established are now all torn apart because we didn't understand what we were fighting for. And we're really saying, I'm fighting for a relationship. And it means that all people are equal. We're all equal. And we all matter. We all value. We're all, in the image of the Lord. And so how I reflect, how I respond to you should be a reflection of that, even when I don't agree with you.
Yeah, and I really I just really strongly believe that Jesus is the key to all that. Like when we try to any issue we try to solve without Jesus, at best, it's going to be an incomplete kind of answer to it. And I mean, how far are you from DC? You live pretty close to DC, right?
45 minutes south of DC.
Okay, yeah. So you're kind of at the epicenter of a lot of the political turmoil and stuff that swirls around.
And it's so different than we lived in Virginia. It's just totally different. We're in it. And we're a sleeping town for DC. So the average person before the pandemic would be in their car for like 20 hours a week just commuting.
Right.
So government and military just all over here. So it's transit area. But man, when people commit, they commit. When they're here, which is a beautiful thing.
Right. Yeah. What advice would you give to like white pastors and white leaders that are wrestling through trying to understand like what's going on and what their response should be and how they should lead people? Is there anything that you could give them, you think that they might not think of or might be helpful to them?
I would say to value that they do have a voice and they do have a vehicle, and whatever voice and vehicle God has given them to be a part of reconciliation, restoration, to do it. And don't focus on what you don't know, but just focus on what you desire to see and be a part of it. Because so many times we wait till all of our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed before we even just cross the line. But I would encourage them just to be them. I think I'd just be you. Love people, love hard, love strong. What you don't understand, surround yourself with the right people to help you understand. Because just because they're a different color and culture, don't mean they're the right people.
Right.
That you need to be gleaning from and listening to. And I don't know. I'll say this, because it's one of the questions you actually had, like what I say to pastors. I would say to know this is what the Lord showed me in all of this, in regards to what color you are, that you have a voice. You are a voice, and be a voice, not an echo. Don't say what everybody else is saying. Don't say what you think everybody else wants you to say or wants to hear. Be a voice of God, be a representation of God. And I'm just reminded of John the Baptist. He said, I am a voice in the wilderness. He didn't say he was the voice. He just said, I am a voice in the wilderness. And these are wilderness times, it feels like, right? But I wouldn't say white pastors, whatever, know that you are a voice. You might not be the voice, but your voice matters. Your voice counts. And your voice is needed at the table. And just be a voice.
Yeah. And I think, people are just, I've been encouraging, people who have a biblical worldview to speak up, because otherwise I think people are intimidated to speak because they're afraid of being called, names or whatever. And so they're, it's kind of easier to keep your head down sometimes and say, well, I don't know if maybe I should just say nothing. But the problem with that is then you only have only the extreme voices are speaking.
Yeah.
And that can just drive the division further. And
and I would say only say what the Father wants you to say.
Right.
Because if you're going to say what everybody else is saying, you're only being an echo. God doesn't need echoes. He needs voices. And you need to be a voice. You need to be a voice. And I'll tell you, I even struggle. And I'm going to back up a little bit too, but I even remember struggling. What do I say? What don't I say? How do I say it, Lord? Right. And I remember God specifically said to me, this is what he said in my heart. I'm not saying this is for everybody, but he said, a prophet speaks when no one else is speaking. And I look through history, Old Testament, New Testament, they were speaking when no one else was speaking. And when you're speaking when everybody else is speaking, sometimes you just become an echo. And you need to be a sound. And what we need to declare the sound of the Lord. And I just want to back up from my own story. So I love diversity. I always have loved diversity. We grew up in the city. So we grew up in a very diverse neighborhood. We had people from Turkey, people from Lebanon. I mean, we just, it was diverse. But I grew up in a Black Baptist church. It was a typical Black Baptist church. Everything was very Black. And so I had friends that I was inviting to church, and that was great from high school. And I remember when I went to Bible college, I came home, and I was at a district meeting for our denomination that I was a part of at the time. And while I was having lunch over, having conversation with another minister in training over lunch, we were just talking, a pastor came out and said, "Hey, there's a group of clergy that want to meet with you." I wasn't aware of the meeting. They took me into a room and just began to, they had this long table, 3 on one side and a chair on the other. So I was sitting in the chair with all by myself.
It felt like the Sanhedrin, or
I did, very much so.
right.
And they began to ask me all these questions. Why was I at the college I was at studying? Don't I see the need in our churches? Why are you not there? And I answered them from my heart. And one of them said, "You probably think this way." It's what he said. "You probably think this way because of the friends you have and the company you keep." And he was speaking about the friends that I have of diversity and the friends I have of different denominations. And it shocked me. And this is what I said: when God called me to ministry, he did not call me to one group of people. He called me to all people. He called me to all nations. I don't even know what this means, but I know I'm not confined to one group of people. And I have to be, I honor and respect what you're doing and try and do, but I have to be true to what God has called me to do. And he's called me to minister to all people. And so when I have these conversations in the middle of this stuff that's going on, I have to say this, that people are always saying, okay, you know, this and that and this and that. I encounter challenges from people of my own color that were trying to keep me back. Good intentions, but trying to keep me back from what God was inviting me to step into. So no matter who you're around, it's important that in the middle of what they're saying, you're always listening to and for the voice of God. And then whatever he tells you to do, you then do it, because you'll have his backing, you'll have his provision, he'll open up the doors for you. If your heart is to build a bridge and bring reconciliation to your congregation, make your congregation more diverse, if that's your heart, cry out to God, ask God for the right kingdom connections, ask him for the right people to bring on staff, right people to put on leadership. And I'm here to tell you, the Lord will do it. I'll tell you a quick story about Pastor John Ott. That was his heart in Roanoke. And he brought me on. I was the first person of color on his staff, but he knew God had put it on his heart to bring on his worship pastor. He paid a price for it, but he knew it was the thing to do. And what he was looking more for than my color was my heart. And in that, he also got color, which is kind of cool. But he was willing to pay the price to bridge the gap. But it's so important for me. I'll be done. But it's so important that we just listen to what God's saying and trust him to give us what we need to do it.
Right. In that, there is that verse that says, God does not look on the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. And that's kind of a tough thing for us to do as humans sometimes. And, but we have that same call. We are called to be like Jesus and look on the heart. And I also think one of the scriptures I find really convicting is the scripture that says that Jesus only did what he saw the Father doing. Like he constantly had his eyes on God the Father. And there's so many in my humanness. Sometimes I just want to react to things.
Yes.
And if I can somehow put God in between myself and whatever is happening, and see how God is responding to what's going on, and mimic that response, everything is going to turn out way better than if I just react.
Absolutely. And we often pray that at Healing Place: God, give us eyes to see what it is you're doing, ears to hear what it is you're saying, and give us the courage to follow that and obey that,
Yeah.
And to let the Lord be our defender too. When he knows our heart is to do what he wants to do, let God defend us and put around us even people that will defend us if need be. I'll tell you this story too. When my pastor heard about that, he was like, "That's unethical. They have no responsibility over your spiritual well-being. Don't worry about it. I will take care of it."
Right.
And he took care of it, And so God will put other people in to be our voice, even when we can't be a voice to certain matters.
Right.
He has our back. He's for us. And, when God is calling you to do something, sometimes we look at the bigness of it, the magnitude of it, instead of the bigness and the magnitude of our Lord. And so if God is inviting my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ to be agents of change, it might feel like it's a mountain, but having faith in God and what he's asking you to do, he is the one that will move the mountain if we'll just do and say what it is he wants us to do and say. He is the one that will move the mountains out of the way.
Yeah, and there's, through my, I'm in level 6 now, so I've been a Christian for a while, and through my history, there's two things I've come to realize that what the Bible says is absolutely true, that you can always count on the fallenness of man. You can always count on, at some point you might be disappointed with some people, but you can also always count on the goodness of God, and he really does have our back through thick and thin. And even when we don't have the strength to fight the battles, he's there to fight them for us. So.
He is. Yeah, there's a scripture I was reading the other week in my quiet time in Exodus, it talks about, he was telling the Israelites, and he's saying, I've carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. And I was like, wow, the whole reason he carried them was for them just to be with him.
Right.
And I was like, wow, Lord. And then that carrying us just to be with him, then he carries us to do with him. And I was thinking about then Isaiah 40:31, they that wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They'll mount up on wings as eagles. They'll run and not be weary, walk and not faint. And it's allowing the Lord to carry us. And when we can't carry ourselves, he is faithful to always carry us.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So just kind of one last question. I always have kind of a mic drop moment at the end where, if you could just say one thing to the church right now, if you had one, it's been, I've talked to a lot of pastors this year, and I haven't found anybody that's said it hasn't been a tough year. There've been wins and there's been good things, and God is faithful, but it's also been kind of a very tough period that we've moved through. And so if you just had one thing you could say to the church, as a whole, to encourage people, what would it be?
Ooh, I would say, I think what God's inviting us as a church to do, as a capital C, is to repent for what we've made church to be instead of what God's wanted to be. I believe this is an invitation for us to reimagine, rethink how we do church. And it's almost like an invitation of the Lord to repent for what we've made it to be, that it has not always been what he desired for it to be. And we've not been a reflection of what his heart was for the church to be, even in our world. And I think that's why we're so broken, because the church has been broken. Yeah.
So to be a healing place, yeah. I think we've come full circle there.
Yeah. Healing place. And it begins with us.
Right.
Because if we get healed, then we can be an expression to the world, and the world can be healed. And this is what I share with our church. We've done it backwards. We want the world to get healed while we stay broken. We need to get healed, and then God will heal the church.
Yeah, that's awesome. Hey, thanks so much for taking the time to chat today. And I think it's been really good. I think people will find it really interesting and really helpful. So thank you for doing that.
Thanks for letting me be a part.
All right. I'm gonna hit end here, and